The death toll in Gaza, as we say, is impossible to verify. The figures are released by the Hamas-controlled health ministry. It is indisputable, though, that civilians in Gaza are suffering terribly in this war. My next guest is the author of Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. Her name is Yasmine Mohammed, and she's with us now. Thank you, Yasmine. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Yasmine, your father, I understand, was born and raised in Gaza. What did he make of Hamas?
Yeah, so yes, he was born and raised in Gaza, lived there his whole life until, it was time for him to go to university, and that's when he went to Egypt. So when he was living there, he didn't have to deal with Hamas, but he did from afar, from Canada, have to watch how terrorists basically overtook his homeland. So he would go back to Gaza every few years. He had a YouTube channel where he would speak about this all the time. He was always sharing videos and pictures of what Gaza looked like before Hamas and before, the Brotherhood, before all of these, Islamic extremists. And he hoped that one day Gaza would somehow rid itself of all of these characters and that it could go back to being what it was when he grew up there.
Do you believe that Hamas is controlling information coming out of the territory? Do you think that any journalist in Gaza can report freely, knowing what you know about Hamas?
No, absolutely not. No person can even speak freely, in their own homes. They have to be careful what they say, what neighbors might hear, what people who they think are friends might hear. Anybody who disagrees with Hamas, they are a terrorist group. They are a violent terrorist group. And so if you speak up against them, it's a death sentence. They will destroy you and they will destroy your family. We've seen, sometimes people from Gaza, when they've tried to rise up, when protesters have tried to speak up, they just get mowed down. There are certain campaigns like Whispers from Gaza where people from Gaza try to speak up about what's going on there, but of course they have to do so risking their lives and protecting their anonymity. So no, it's like Iran or Afghanistan or any of these other states that are being controlled by extremists. The people are not free, absolutely not.
Many people, some people anyway, are saying that Palestinians are indistinguishable from Hamas. They say, look, they voted for them. Polls show they support them. They support violent struggle against Israel. Do you agree with that?
I mean, some people in Gaza, of course, do support Hamas, but they're talking about voting them in 18 years ago when a lot of the people living there now weren't even born yet, or weren't at voting age. And once, people could say this, and people did say the same thing about Iranians under the Islamic regime. They're like, well, they voted for them. Well, they voted 40 years ago. Once you get a terrorist regime in power, you can't vote them out. And it is very frustrating for me to hear that kind of thing, especially from Americans who are very unhappy, under Trump, for example. So would they like it if people just went around saying, well, Trump is indistinguishable from every American? No, of course not. Sometimes people can get voted in, or groups can get voted in, and then half the population don't like them, or they change their mind. Like the Gazans, for example, when they realize we don't even have clean water, we don't even have functioning electricity, we don't have safety for our children. So they realized that they were duped by Hamas's propaganda and lies, and they no longer want them in power. But what can you do at that point? Vote them out? This is not they're not in a democratic nation where they're not free to just vote them out. And so they're stuck. But polls do show that there are a lot of people, I think it was like 50-50. It's not that, I wish it was higher. But, you have to also keep in mind that people are even worried when they're filling out these polls because they don't know who's going to see them and who's going to read them and is it going to get traced back to them. So oftentimes, you know, they could just be answering what they think is the safest answer for them and their family.
You've written a book about Western liberals and radical Islam. And how would you say that the narrative in some parts of the West, in the media, in academia, has legitimized Hamas?
Yeah, it's really disheartening. It's like, you know, that when I wrote my book, it was criticizing what I could see was happening, and I never actually imagined it would come to the point that you would find politicians and, you know, university leaders actually justifying terrorist acts. You know, it's sickening. There's even no matter what grievances the Palestinian people have or the Gazan people have, no matter how much you support them and you empathize with them, there's no way that you can ever justify murdering people that are going to a music festival, going into people's homes and burning entire families. Like the kinds of atrocities that Hamas did, I honestly expected that nobody would have a single word to say. I mean, that was one of my first tweets, is I never thought that anybody could even dare to start to try to justify their actions. I'm actually really, really shocked that it's not just people who are indoctrinated into extremist Islam that are justifying their actions, but it's like...
No, we've seen it from Harvard and all sorts of institutions. I mean, Yasmine, given all the horrific violence that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, do you have hope for the future? Do you think that Palestinians and Israelis can live alongside one another?
I think that that's a really difficult question, because it's like asking me, you know, if Jewish people would be comfortable living alongside, you know, Germans after World War II. You know, like it's a very risky question, and it's one that I wouldn't even want to even ask a Jewish person at this point, because we're so in the destruction and the rawness. I mean, I was speaking to families who's have family missing and like 2-3-year-old twin daughters, and you know, I have daughters myself, and you know, you just, how can you even start to think about, you just want to do anything you possibly can to make sure something like this never happens again. And I think that's going to always be the most important goal going forward.
Well, Yasmine, thank you so much for talking to us. We appreciate it. We appreciate your bravery. Yasmine Mohammed is the author of Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. Her father was born and raised in Gaza. Thank you so much, Yasmine.